I don't know how to describe it other than like a demon type of sound.
But it's silhouetted, hulking, every bit of 5.5 feet wide, 13 to 14 foot tall, pitch black.
The one thing that ran through my mind when I had this encounter was I don't have a big enough gun.
Your host, two-time witness and field researcher for more than 40 years, William Jevning. Welcome to Creek Devil.
We're going to talk about a story from Orleans, California, dated 1952. It's a really interesting story. There's not a whole lot of them that are talked about pre-Patterson Sasquatch filming in 1967 from the Bluff Creek area, but this is one of those. And it's interesting it's this early from 1952 because we don't really hear about stuff until Jerry Crew, who was a heavy equipment operator. He was really the first time, they wrote a story, an article about footprints from that particular area, but that wasn't until 1958. So this story is from 1952. And, from talking to Al Hodgson, of course, they knew about things being over in that area from way back in the 1920s and 30s, and later, of course. But, so I don't have a name. This person, he does. No, I don't believe this witness had a name given in the article, but let's go ahead and jump into this. All right. See, I've got two mice. I have two computers going, so I've got to grab the right mouse to get the story going up here where I can read it. So it starts out, it says, this person's encounter was so shocking that he blocked it from consciousness for a time. He did recall the events later, however, and this is what he related. And I'm not sure what the source of this story is. I got it from Bobby Short's page, I'm sorry. And she was a friend of mine, of course is gone now, but I don't recall the exact source of this story. But anyhow, he starts out, and it's quotes, I began to remember more and more of what happened. I had me a bad case of the jitters as the memory uncoiled. And, we hear this with stories, with encounters of people. And I've interviewed witnesses, and many times, they don't want to go on record or talk about it openly, but they've related their story to me personally. And a number of these were as frightening as this, and were much more so, in fact. I think Carol's encounter, and her neighbors was much more frightening than this story. But this does happen to people where they'll block out things if it's too traumatic. And you know that from being in law enforcement. I'm sure you've encountered people.
If it's something extremely traumatic, your brain's going to block it out just as a self-defense mechanism to spare you that trauma emotionally.
Right. So I think we should keep that in mind when considering this account. So he goes on and says, the first part of the story took me back to 1952, when I had gone to Orleans to start preliminary work on a logging operation with two men by the names of Lee, and it's Vlery, and John Russell. And I suppose we could look up those names he gives. He's very specific about that. Now, something to think about, too. Now, Orleans is on Highway 96 in Northern California along the Klamath River. And that's kind of the area that you enter the Bluff Creek area, and you can go down the road farther south, and there's a road, and they call it Patterson Road now, but it used to be, I think it was Forest Road 13 or 10, one of those two. I can't remember now, but one of those two. And you can go to Bluff Creek up that road also, but you could also, and I think back in those days, that's how they were going into that region to do, the bits of logging they did.
Right.
So that kind of gives you an idea of where Orleans is. And I'm kind of bummed out. There used to be a great place to eat there, and I was told it was closed now. You go a long way in that country. There's not much up there on Highway 96. It's about 45 minutes south going to Willow Creek, and then Orleans was the next place. And there may be a place there now, I don't know, but it's a very small place.
Yeah.
And now Orleans also, just as a side note, before we go on, in 1967, when the 3 sets of Sasquatch tracks were found by the logging crew in Bluff Creek that led to Patterson and Gimlin going there. When Green and Hendon and a dog handler, they flew down in a small plane from British Columbia. Orleans was the place where this airstrip was. That's where they landed and took off from.
Oh, okay.
Just to give everybody a little bit of, idea of what that area is like. And again, there's not much there. But, okay, so let's move on. One evening, Josh told me Lee had gone up to Happy Camp. Now, that's the next little town north of Orleans on Highway 96. But not having transportation back, wanted me to take the Mercury and go up and get him. I had driven an extremely crooked and dangerous road up there, but not being able to find him, started back alone to Orleans. I'm not sure what the roads were like back in those days. I'm thinking they were probably paved, but so I'm not sure where he went. He must have gone, and maybe they were dirt. I don't know. That particular place he went to.
Yeah.
I mean, he could have gone. If you head west from Orleans, you go up into the Bluff Creek area. Maybe that's how he was going to Happy Camp. I don't know why he would go that way, but maybe he had wrong directions or something. But anyhow, it had been raining heavily after. Let me go back a little bit. Okay, so but not being able to find him, he started back alone to Orleans. It had been raining very heavily, and after going back a few miles, I found there had been a slide across the road. There was a man with a flashlight there who told me I could still get back to Orleans by way of a detour across the river. He said it was a dirt road that went through Bear Valley and would come out at the mouth of Bluff Creek a few miles below Orleans. Okay. Yeah, I do know that area. So he sent him around the Bluff Creek way to those forest roads 10 or 13 that I mentioned. That comes out back on Highway 96.
Yeah.
Okay. I had been driving slowly down this road for about 20 miles, I guess, sort of daydreaming when I saw it. Now, that's big country, so you can go an awful long way and not see another person, even to this day.
Yeah, you're out in the middle of nowhere. All you're going to see is trees.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's even, like I said, even today, there's not much up there. That when I saw it, dimly in the headlights, and the rain... Okay, let me see. It's kind of worded weird. Dimly in the headlights, and the rain was a shaggy orangutan-like apparition of a human. For an instant, I had the impression the shaggy hair of the creature was a hoary blue-gray in the headlights. An ogre, I remember thinking, but the thing swiftly backpedaled off the road behind a tree. I automatically passed it off as imagination and drove on by the spot. Suddenly, without warning, the car went into a violent, unreasonable skid. I brought the car back under control, but for some reason glanced into the rearview mirror in the dim light of the taillights and license display bulb. I thought I could see a savage-looking face looking through the rear glass. I continued on, and when I looked again, there was no face. So again, concluded it was imagination. Let me go up here. I had gone on another quarter mile, I guess, when across the road was a small 6-inch sapling. I stopped the car and got out, intending to drag it aside if possible. Suddenly, I heard the swift thud of flying feet, of something coming down the road. Reality was upon me, and I remember cursing myself for not paying attention to what I had previously seen. It was the shaggy human-like monster I had seen in the headlights. Excuse me. It at once started circling around me, snarling and acting very menacing. It kept this circling up for some time, once came up quite close. I could see its face reflecting in the headlights much better. The eyes were round and rather luminous. The hair on top of its head rather low and rounded. Let me go back. See, some of the wording is weird in this article.
Yeah, it is.
So I don't know who wrote this, but okay, so he says the hair on top of its rather low and rounded head was pretty short. The eye teeth were far longer than a human's. Also, the chest and upper part of its torso was rather bare of hair, and also leathery looking. It wasn't too tall, not much more than my own 5 feet 9 inches, although it had a stooped, long-armed posture. So, I think a lot of times, now the arms are longer, but I think a lot of times that kind of stooped posture And that's something that's described very often, where the shoulders are kind of slumped down like it's, almost I guess, a kind of a leaning forward position.
Yeah.
It's not what I saw in my encounter, but the creature, well, one was moving and the other standing still, but their posture wasn't quite like that. Maybe the second one that was moving. I wasn't really focused on details at that time. I was kind of scared out of myself, But we get that description pretty often. So,
well, this one sounds like a juvenile with the heights and not a lot of hair on the chest,
it
upper
could
body.
be. It's interesting too. Well, the height isn't that tall, maybe 6 feet, and but the description is different. Now, like with the Patterson Sasquatch in the same area, because we talked about the Bob Titmus story recently. And with the Patterson Sasquatch, I talked to Bob Gimlin. He got a good look at the teeth. The canines weren't well pronounced by his description.
Right.
And he was pretty close. He got a good look at them. But this one had, much more pronounced canines. So it kind of makes me wonder if there wasn't a different variation in the area at that time.
Maybe a type. Well, I wouldn't say a type 2 or 3.
Well, I would say that, sure. And here's another thing. I mentioned Bobby Short, who was a friend of mine. She had a sighting up in Northern California, and her and I discussed our individual sightings with each other numerous times. And what she saw was markedly different than what I saw. Hers was much more human-looking. So I'm kind of wondering maybe if there weren't several different variants in that region, at least from time to time.
It sounds like there is, or was at that time.
Right. Okay, so let's go on. Although it had a stooped, long-armed posture. Then suddenly it changed tactics. It would stalk off down the road and would come charging back like a bat out of hell when I started towards the car. The hour was late, the thing was becoming more and more menacing, and it was almost paralyzed, this time paralyzed by fear. See, now it kind of went from that menacing behavior circling him, and it's interesting that there was a log across the road. Now, whether that was natural or if the creature had done that, we don't know. And he didn't speculate. But
yeah,
the behavior is interesting. I've interviewed people before that have been charged by the creatures. So, this is kind of a clear indicator that the creature, definitely had malice towards him, and this charging, at least bluff charging to start with.
Yeah.
Okay, so he goes on. Suddenly a plan of escape, born out of desperation, popped into my head. Since the monster seemed to think I couldn't get away, why not... so let me go down here a little bit. Why not, when it went down the road again, playing cat and mouse, try to get in the car and smash through the sapling? This I did, and sprang for the door of the car a dozen feet away. No sooner was I inside when there it was, trying to claw through the window. I jerked the car into gear, floored the accelerator, and can vividly remember the wet sapling glistening whitely in the headlights as the car slashed it aside. I remember the scream of rage and frustration it gave. It was a curious trumpeting sound like the scream of a stallion and roar of a mad grizzly. That's a very interesting description.
Yeah, it is.
So I guess if anybody's out there has heard anything like that, let us know. Okay, now this I can relate to. I had this happen once. The car then felt as though it were being held. I had this happen once to my own car, backed by something half riding and attempting to stop it. But the powerful mercury proved too much for it, and after a couple 100 yards, I felt no more resistance. So I wonder if it was holding on while he was driving. So he said for a couple 100 yards. That's kind of a long ways.
Yeah, it is.
We.
But that's something that you do hear a lot of people report is they'll grab a hold of the car and hold on to it, and you can't go anywhere until they let go.
We were up in a place called the Bald Hills in Washington. That's if you go out of Roy, Washington, on the backside of Fort Lewis, you drive out to the Bald Hills, and there's a place called Clear Lake out there. So that area had a long history, excuse me, of activity and sightings. So we went out there, me and a friend, to see if we could, hear or see anything one evening. And we did hear some screams. So I moved my car to another area to see if we could get maybe some better sound a little closer. And I backed into this spot, because I didn't want to have to turn around real quick in a place if something happened. So
Right.
I backed my car up to this tree in preparation to be able to just drive forward out and down the road to get out of the area if we had to. And we tried to leave. I can't remember. I think we just got bored because there was no activity. We didn't hear anything anyway. And then my car wouldn't move, and it was a stick shift. And I'm thinking, what's wrong? Maybe there's something wrong with the transmission. Well, there wasn't anything wrong with the transmission. I shifted into a lower gear, and it was like a cork being pulled out of a bottle. And we couldn't figure out what it was. I waited till daylight to go out and look at the car, and in the dust, the car was dark brown, so the car was pretty dusty from those gravel roads up there. Mm-hmm. And on the quarter panels in the back and the upper part, you could see these markings in the dust where it was obvious that something with hands had held the car there. And kind of freaked us out the next day, but and we didn't go back up there. But so
That takes a lot of strength to be able to keep a car from going anywhere. I mean, that's nuts.
That's crazy, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Let's go back. He said, I remember the scream of rage and frustration it gave. It was a curious trumpeting sound like the scream of a stallion and the roar of a mad grizzly. The car then felt as though it were being held. Okay, we went through that part. 100 yards, I felt no more resistance. To top this unbelievable experience off, sorry folks, believe it or not, I promptly forgot the whole experience. Then and there it went out of my mind. Not even the next day when Lee asked me if I had seen anything unusual on that road at last night did I remember. He had come later from Happy Camp with another man hired to take him to Orleans. Now it's interesting that he would ask him if he'd seen anything unusual. Why would he ask that unless he knew something already?
Or unless he had an experience of his own and he was kind of testing the waters to see what his friend would say.
Yeah. So the last paragraph, he says, a few days later, an incident happened that should have brought the experience back, but didn't. Lee noticed a big dent in the grill of the car and asked me how it had got there. I told him I didn't know. Incidentally, Lee told me that something had tried to push them off the road when they came through on the detour. He said, there's something strange going on around here, and let the matter drop. It's interesting that, something tried to push them off the road going through the same route he had gone in.
Yep.
That's pretty aggressive behavior for one of these creatures, especially, what may have been a younger one.
Yeah, it is.
Well, what do you think about the story?
Well, I don't want to say I'm on the fence, but I don't want to say I don't believe it. Everything he described is very common things to hear today. My only issue is the memory thing. When exactly did he get his memory back about it?
Didn't say.
Did something trigger that?
Yeah, it makes you wonder. There could have been a lot more information with that particular article, and maybe there is somewhere. I don't know. That's the only reference I know of it, and I don't recall where Bobby got the story from.
Yeah. I think it's probably true. I mean, the brain is a very powerful thing, and it's going to do what it wants to, and if it's going to protect you from traumatic memories, it's going to do that, and it's going to do it in a way to where it'll blow your mind. But I'd just like to know more on how he finally remembered it. Did he go through something else that triggered that memory, or, how'd that come about?
Yeah, I'm with you there. I know Al Hodgson told me privately that there were a lot more stories from those areas. I never got to talk to him more about those particulars. When he and I last spoke, it was his birthday, so I didn't want to press him too much, and I was never able to connect with him down there again. But very interesting account. I'm kind of with you on the information. It sounds like it could have been real. But we'll leave that up to you folks. So, let us know what you think in the comments on YouTube. And with that, thanks for joining us, folks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning, @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open out there.